My name is Cecilia Mariana Cubas Gusinky. I was 31 years old when they took everything from me. I had a life, a real one. I had a mother who loved me more than words can describe. I had a father who had once stood at the highest level of power in my country. I had a home, a business, a future I was actively building. I had plans I had not yet carried out, places I had not yet visited, mornings I had not yet woken up to greet. I was a businesswoman. I was a daughter. I was a woman who drove herself home after long days and trusted that the streets of the city she grew up in were safe enough. That trust was the last ordinary thing I ever had. On the evening of September 21st, 2004, I was intercepted on the way to my house in a suburb of Asunción, Paraguay. Men with guns blocked my vehicle in front and behind. They fired more than 20 shots into the metal around me. They broke my window with a hammer. They dragged me out of my own car and forced me into theirs. I would not see the outside world again. For nearly 5 months, I was held underground, in darkness, in a city that was searching for me without knowing I was already there. And on a night when the rest of the world was hanging lights and celebrating, my captors made their final decision. They put me in the ground while I was still breathing. My body was found on February 16, 2005, sealed beneath the concrete floor of an ordinary-looking house in the city of Ñemby, less than 20 kilometers from where I was taken. I had been there the entire time. This is what happened to me. This is the truth that took investigators months to uncover, and prosecutors years to fully prosecute. This is the story of the political terror machine that treated my life as a financial transaction and discarded me when the numbers stopped adding up. My name was Cecilia Cubas, and this is my story. This is her final story. I was born on January 14, 1973, in Asunción, the capital of Paraguay. The oldest child of Raúl Cubas Grau and Mirtha Gusinky, I came into the world during a period when my country was still living under the long shadow of a military dictatorship, a country that was slowly, painfully, learning what it meant to be free. My father was a civil engineer before he became a politician, a man who built things. My mother was a woman of extraordinary resilience, someone who would prove that strength in the most devastating way imaginable in the years after my death. Growing up in their household meant growing up with an awareness of public life, of the weight that comes with a recognizable last name, of the particular kind of exposure that follows families like mine in a small country where everyone knows everyone. But I was not defined by my father's politics or my mother's prominence. I had my own identity, my own ambitions, my own way of moving through the world. I was an entrepreneur. Paraguay in the late 1990s and early 2000s was a country navigating an uncertain transition from dictatorship to democracy. And within that instability, there were people who chose to build rather than wait. I was one of those people. I ran my own business, navigated the practical realities of a developing economy, and built professional relationships through hard work and personal initiative. To those who knew me, I was someone who was serious about her work, someone with direction, someone who had chosen to invest in her country's future, even when that future was not guaranteed. I was 31 years old in September 2004, an age of full personhood. Not a girl, not an abstract symbol of anything. A woman with a career, a social life, a home she had made for herself, relationships she had cultivated, opinions she had formed, friends who called her Cici, a mother she spoke to regularly, a father whose public story had already marked her life in ways she had not chosen. My father, Raúl Cubas Grau, had been elected president of Paraguay in 1998. His tenure lasted less than a year. In March 1999, following the assassination of Vice President Luis Maria Argaña, a political murder that shook the country to its foundations, my father resigned under enormous public pressure and went into exile in Brazil. The Cubas family had been at the center of one of the most turbulent political crises in modern Paraguayan history. That crisis ended, but its aftershocks did not. In the years that followed, Paraguay remained fragile. the political class was fractured. Economic inequality was stark and visible. In rural areas and in the radical margins of the left, anger had been building for decades. Anger that would eventually find its expression not in ballots, but in bullets. To the men who would later plan my abduction, I was not a person. I was a symbol, a daughter of the political class, a name that could be converted into cash, a hostage whose very existence as the child of a former president made her more valuable in their calculation than any ordinary citizen could ever be. But I want you to understand something before we go any further into the darkness of what they did to me. I was not a symbol. I was not a transaction. I was not a pawn in anyone's ideological war. I was Cecilia. I was a woman who drove herself home on an ordinary Tuesday evening, expecting to pull into her driveway and close the door behind her and continue her life. I never got to close that door. My daily routine in September 2004 was unremarkable in the way that most people's lives are unremarkable, full of meaning, but invisible to everyone outside the circle of people who loved me. I worked. I moved through the city. I traveled the roads I had traveled 100 times before. Laguna Grande, the neighborhood where I lived in the greater metropolitan area of Asunción, was familiar territory. The streets were ones I knew. On the evening of September 21st, I was returning home. It was a Wednesday. The sun was going down over Paraguay's capital region. It was the kind of evening that felt like any other evening. It was not any other evening. What I could not have known, what no investigation would fully confirm until years later, was that I had been watched. My movements had been studied. My route had been mapped. The men waiting for me had been planning this moment for weeks, possibly months, with a level of operational discipline that would later stun investigators familiar with organized crime in Latin America. They knew when I left. They knew where I was going. They knew exactly where to position their vehicles to leave me no escape. I want you to hold that detail for a moment. Because understanding what happened to me requires understanding that this was not random. I was specifically chosen, specifically targeted, specifically hunted by an organization that had studied my life well enough to intercept it at the precise moment of their choosing. That organization had a name. And understanding that name, understanding what it was, what it believed, and who was behind it, is essential to understanding why I never made it home that night. Paraguay does not have a long history of political kidnapping in the way that Colombia or Peru experienced it during the height of guerrilla insurgency in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. For most of its recent history, crime in Paraguay was tied to contraband, corruption, and the narcotics trade that flowed through its borders. Political violence was associated with the Stroessner era, with state repression, not with organized insurgent groups operating outside government control. But something was changing in the years before my abduction. Something that most of Paraguay's institutions were not equipped to recognize or respond to. The Partido Patria Libre, the Free Homeland Party, had existed for years as a legal political organization. On the surface, it was one of many leftist parties operating in Paraguay's post-dictatorship democratic space. It advocated for land reform, opposed what it described as oligarchic control of the economy, and positioned itself within a Marxist-Leninist ideological framework. As a political party, it was registered, it participated in elections, it published manifestos. It was, by any formal standard, a legitimate part of the political landscape. But inside that legal structure, something else was growing. Investigators would later establish that the Partido Patria Libre had an armed wing, a clandestine operational structure that ran parallel to its public political face. This was not a new discovery in the history of Latin American leftist movements. The model of combining legal political activity with underground armed operations had been used across the continent for decades. What made Paraguay's version distinctive was that by the early 2000s, the armed faction of the PPL had made contact with one of the most experienced and feared guerrilla organizations in the Western Hemisphere, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, better known as the FARC. The FARC had been fighting in Colombia since 1964. By the time they connected with the PPL leadership, they had accumulated 4 decades of expertise in kidnapping for ransom, guerrilla finance, clandestine logistics, and the specific operational science of holding hostages for extended periods. They knew things that the Paraguayan group did not know, and they were willing to share that knowledge. According to the investigations that would follow my death, Osmar Martinez, who had risen to lead the armed wing of the PPL, following the flight of earlier leaders Juan Arome and Anuncio Martí, established direct contact with Rodrigo Granda, the man known as the FARC's chancellor, and its primary international liaison. Communications between Martinez and Granda, later recovered from the computer of slain FARC commander Raúl Reyes in 2008, documented this relationship in detail. The FARC did not simply offer advice from a distance. They sent someone. A man operating under the alias Comandante Santiago, later identified as Orly Jurado Palomino, a Colombian national, traveled to Paraguay to serve as a tactical advisor. He participated in the planning of the operation. He trained recruits in remote rural areas of Queguazú and Canindeyú. He instructed the group in how to conduct ransom negotiations, how to maintain a clandestine holding site in an urban environment, and how to manage the process of extracting money from a high-profile family. I was the subject of that training. There had been an earlier case. In 2001, Maria Edith Bordón de Bernardi, the wife of a prominent businessman, had been kidnapped and released after a ransom was paid. Juan Arome and Anuncio Martí had been implicated in that case, and after their arrest and controversial release, following allegations of torture, they fled to Brazil. Their departure did not dismantle the network. It restructured it. Osmar Martinez filled the leadership vacuum with an even more radical commitment to armed action. The Paraguayan state in 2004 did not have a counterterrorism framework. There was no law specifically criminalizing terrorism as a distinct category of offense. There was no specialized unit equipped to handle politically motivated kidnapping at this level of operational sophistication. When the PPL selected me as their target, they were operating in a legal and institutional gap that they had helped to create by studying the weaknesses of the state they claimed to oppose. My family was not invisible. My father's face had been on the front pages of every newspaper in Paraguay in 1999. Our name was associated, in the rhetoric of the radical left, with the political class that they held responsible for the country's inequality. When the PPL's leadership sat down to choose a target that would generate maximum ransom leverage and maximum symbolic impact, my name appeared on a list. Looking back, and I have nothing but time to look back now, the warning signs were not ones that any individual could have seen in the ordinary course of a life. They were not the red flags of a personal relationship gone wrong, not the escalating pressure of a domestic situation, not the behavior of a specific person in my daily circle. The danger that was building toward me was institutional, political, and invisible to the naked eye. It was gathering in jungle training camps. It was being discussed in encrypted communications between Asunción and Bogotá. It was rehearsed in remote villages by men who had chosen ideology over humanity, and who had decided, long before September 21st, 2004, that my life was worth less than their political agenda. The warning signs were there for a state to see, had the state been looking. Paraguay's security institutions had information about the PPL's armed wing. There were intelligence reports. There were known figures. There were patterns that, assembled correctly, would have pointed toward an operation of exactly the kind that claimed my life. But the state was not looking. Not carefully enough. Not in time. And so, on a September evening, as I turned my vehicle toward home, 5 men in 2 cars were waiting for me. They had a plan. They had weapons. They had a house already prepared. They had a hole already dug. They were ready. I was not. It was approximately 6:45 in the evening on September 21st, 2004. I was driving through the Laguna Grande neighborhood, approaching my residence. The light was fading. The streets were familiar. I had driven this route so many times that my hands knew the turns before my mind registered them. What happened next unfolded in seconds. A blue Volkswagen Santana appeared ahead of me and stopped, blocking the road. Before I could process what was happening, a red Ford Escort closed in from behind, sealing off any retreat. I was boxed in, front and back, no space to maneuver, no room to turn. Then the shooting started. According to the forensic reconstruction of the crime scene and witness accounts gathered by investigators, the attackers fired at least 26 rounds, some accounts cite as many as 40, into and around my vehicle. The shots were aimed at my tires, at the engine, at the body of the car. The intent was not to kill me. The intent was to disable my vehicle and prevent any possibility of escape. The shots were precise, controlled, military in their application. I was inside that car while the metal around me was being perforated by bullets. The glass shook. The frame shuddered. The vehicle stopped. One of the men, later identified through years of investigation as Lorenzo Gonzalez Martinez, descended from the red Escort carrying a handgun, positioned to ensure I could not break through the barrier ahead. Another man approached my window. When I did not open the door, and I did not open it, I held on. Because what else do you do when the world outside has become a nightmare? He produced a metal hammer and used it to break the passenger side window. There is nothing abstract about that detail. A man stood beside my car and swung a hammer into the glass until it gave way. What followed was a physical confrontation inside and around the vehicle. I was overpowered. I was pulled out of my own car. I was transferred into the blue Volkswagen Santana, and then, shortly after, moved again into a white Ford Ranger pickup truck that was waiting nearby. The vehicles involved in the initial interception carried false documents, as investigators would confirm later. Every element of the operation had been planned to minimize traceability. The convoy moved. I was taken out of my neighborhood, out of Fernando de la Mora, away from everything I had ever known. Within hours, my friend Diana Sosa received a phone call. A man with a rural Paraguayan accent told her that Cecilia Cubas had been taken and that her family would be contacted with instructions. Diana did not hesitate. She went directly to my parents. My mother, Mirtha Gusinky, received that call in a moment that would redefine the rest of her life. My father, Raul Cubas, who had already survived the political catastrophe of 1999, now faced something that no former political office could prepare a human being for. Their daughter had been kidnapped. The destination I had been taken to was a house at Las Palmas 342, in the Mbocayati neighborhood of Ñemby, a city in the greater Asunción metropolitan area. Ñemby was not remote. It was not a jungle compound or a guerrilla encampment. It was an ordinary residential street, a neighborhood where people lived, where children played, where, in just a few months, people would string up Christmas lights and celebrate the holidays as they always did. The house had been prepared in advance. The group living there had spent weeks presenting themselves to the neighborhood as an ordinary family, a couple, people who kept to themselves, who received visitors, who interacted with neighbors in the normal rhythms of residential life. Neighbors, investigators would later learn with horror, had sometimes brought them food, soup, the small gestures of community that people exchange without suspicion. They did not know what was happening inside. Inside, behind the facade of normalcy, I was held in a small room with inadequate light and limited ventilation. The people who held me referred to me in their communications not by my name, but as the fruit. The dehumanization was deliberate. It was tactical. It was the application of a kidnapping methodology that the FARC had refined over decades, reducing the hostage to a commodity, an asset, a thing with a price attached to it. Proof of life communications began quickly. Photographs of me holding current newspapers were sent to my family, along with handwritten notes. The first ransom demand was for more than $5 million. My family responded. They entered into negotiations they had no preparation for, facing an enemy whose logic they did not yet understand. For weeks, communications continued through electronic messages. My captors monitored the public response in Paraguay carefully. The country was plastered with posters. Free Cecilia. The case was front-page news. A society that had already been traumatized by political violence rallied around my name in a way that moved millions of people, and that my captors noted with cold, strategic calculation. In November 2004, a ransom payment was made. The amount varies across sources, but investigators established that the payment was in the range of $300,000, delivered in a rural area of the Caguazú department. My captors accepted the money, and then they explained with brutal clarity that the payment was not a ransom. It was a fine, a penalty for the family's behavior during negotiations, for the involvement of police, for delays in meeting their demands. The distinction was not semantic. It was a technique borrowed directly from FARC kidnapping doctrine, a method of resetting the financial clock, of extracting an initial payment without closing the case, of ensuring that the hostage remained in captivity while a new and higher demand was introduced. The new demand was $3 million. It was accompanied by a requirement that the family announce the payment on national television. My family said they did not have that money. On December 21, 2004, all communication stopped. The silence that followed was not neutral. It was not a negotiating pause. It was a decision already made in rooms I would never see, by people who had decided that maintaining me in captivity was now more dangerous for them than ending it. Christmas came. In the house at Las Palmas 342, the group who held me decorated their home and observed the holiday. They sat together. They spoke with neighbors. They performed the rituals of the season with a normality that is, even now, almost impossible to comprehend. They did this while I was still alive beneath their feet. My family did not stop looking for me. In the days and weeks that followed the end of communications on December 21st, the Cubas Gusinky family maintained public pressure, cooperated with investigators, and refused to accept the silence from my captors as a final answer. My mother, in particular, became the public face of a family in agony, a woman whose visible pain became inseparable from the national conversation about what was happening to her daughter. Paraguay had never experienced a kidnapping quite like this one. The country had known political violence. It had lived under Stroessner's dictatorship for 35 years. But the targeted abduction of the daughter of a former president by a domestic armed organization with international guerrilla connections was something different, something that forced the government of President Nicanor Duarte Frutos to confront the inadequacy of its own security apparatus. The investigation was assigned to prosecutor Sandra Quiñones, who would later describe the case as the most difficult and emotionally devastating of her professional life. Working alongside Police Commissioner Francisco Resquin and a team that expanded as the case deepened, Quiñones pursued every available lead, but there were catastrophic failures along the way. Investigators would later discover, and this discovery would trigger one of the most sweeping institutional purges in Paraguayan police history, that in December 2004, a police officer had actually filmed the exterior of the house at Las Palmas 342. He had gathered intelligence in the area. He had been in proximity to the location where I was being held, and he had not filed a report. He had not escalated the information. He had not done the one thing that his position required him to do with intelligence that could have saved my life. Whether this represented negligence, corruption, or deliberate obstruction was never fully established to the satisfaction of all parties. But the practical consequence was devastation. I was in that house. Investigators had someone who had been physically near it, and the information went nowhere. There were also strong suspicions, examined throughout the investigation, that elements within the security forces had been compromised, that information about police operations was reaching the kidnappers through channels inside the institutions that were supposed to be hunting them. The Partido Patria Libre had invested years in building ideological networks within civil society. The possibility that some of those networks extended into law enforcement was not, given the context, far-fetched. Meanwhile, at a location in Coronel Oviedo, on January 13, 2005, a meeting took place. Investigators would later reconstruct this meeting through testimony, including from an informant who had been embedded within the group. The meeting has since been referred to as the Final Point Meeting. Members of the PPL's political committee gathered to discuss the operational situation. The decision they reached, in the clinical language of guerrilla logistics, was that the operation needed to be concluded. The tactical advisor, Comandante Santiago, had reportedly recommended ending the operation, that maintaining the hostage had become too dangerous given the increasing pressure from law enforcement. The committee voted. The life of Cecilia Cubas was formally ended as a matter of organizational decision. This fact, that my death was decided not in a moment of passion or violence, but in a committee meeting, by a vote, as a matter of political and logistical strategy, represents perhaps the most disturbing truth of everything that happened to me. I was not killed in a struggle. I was not killed as an accident. I was killed because a group of people sat around a table and concluded that keeping me alive was no longer worth the risk to themselves. Back in Yembi, the implementation of that decision was carried out with the same cold methodology that had characterized the entire operation from the beginning. I was sedated with midazolam, a powerful pharmaceutical sedative. My mouth and nose were covered with adhesive tape, and I was placed in a tunnel that had been constructed beneath the concrete floor of the house. A tunnel dug in the shape of a letter Z, approximately 2 meters underground. The tunnel was sealed. Concrete and red sand were poured over the entrance. Forensic pathologist Dr. Bellassay's autopsy report, completed after my body was recovered, confirmed what the physical evidence made horribly clear. There was soil and lime in my lungs. I was breathing when they put me in the ground. The estimated date of my death was placed around December 24th, 2004, Christmas Eve. The investigation did not know any of this with certainty in the weeks that followed. Investigators pursued leads, followed communications, pressed informants, and worked outward from the network of people connected to the PPL's armed structure. Peripheral members of the group were identified and detained. Each arrest produced more information. Each piece of information narrowed the geography of the search. In early February 2005, a specific address began to appear in the investigative picture. The house at Las Palmas 342 in Yembi was identified through a combination of surveillance footage, informant testimony, and the convergence of multiple investigative threads. Sandra Quiñones ordered a search. On February 16, 2005, investigators and firefighters entered the property. They were initially searching for documents and weapons, operating under a theory about a training tunnel. When they examined the floors of the interior, one section of concrete felt different. The color was not consistent with the surrounding material. The surface had been laid more recently. They began to excavate. The smell reached them before the tunnel was fully opened. When the sealed entrance was broken through, and the firefighters lowered themselves into the darkness below, they found what everyone had prayed not to find. My body was recovered from the underground chamber on the afternoon of February 16, 2005. Former President Raul Cubas and my mother Mirtha Gusinky had accompanied investigators to the site. My father identified the location. My mother bore witness. The news broke across Paraguay within hours. The country that had spent 5 months hoping I would be found alive received instead the confirmation that I had been dead for nearly 2 months, buried beneath an ordinary house in an ordinary neighborhood, while the investigation searched the countryside, the jungles, and every other geography except the one where I actually was. President Nicanor Duarte Frutos arrived at the site. The image of a head of state standing over the location where a woman had been buried alive by a domestic guerrilla organization was transmitted across the country and the region. It was not possible, after that image, to pretend that Paraguay did not have a political violence problem of the most serious kind. The institutional response was immediate, though critics would argue it was insufficient and overdue. Interior Minister Nelson Mora was replaced by Rogelio Benitez. Police Chief Carlos Zelaya stepped down. 32 precinct commanders were removed from their posts in what the government described as a structural purge of the security forces. The official language was accountability. The reality was that the Paraguayan state, caught catastrophically flat-footed, was attempting to demonstrate to a grieving and outraged public that it understood the scale of its failure. Whether it truly understood, whether the lessons of my case were actually absorbed, would be tested in the years to come. Justice, in cases like mine, does not arrive in a single moment. It accumulates slowly, across years of trials, extraditions, appeals, and the grinding procedural machinery of courts that must weigh evidence, establish legal standards, and apply sentencing frameworks that were often written for different crimes in different eras. But it comes, and in the case of Cecilia Cubas, it came, piece by piece, for nearly 2 decades. The first major conviction was that of Osmar Martinez, the man who had led the PPL's armed wing, who had made contact with the FARC, who had recruited the operational team and supervised the planning of my abduction. He was tried and convicted in 2006. His sentence was 35 years, the maximum available under Paraguayan law for the crimes established at that time. He was imprisoned. He died in custody in 2015, serving his sentence but escaping the full weight of the proceedings that would follow. Anastasio Mieres was sentenced to 35 years for his organizational role. Francisca Andino received 30 years for her participation in the PPL leadership structure that authorized my execution. Roberto Otazu, the man who physically constructed the underground chamber where my body was found, was among those convicted for his direct participation in the crime. The 6 campesinos, senior PPL figures who had fled to Argentina in search of asylum, were extradited in 2008 after their refugee status was revoked. They were tried and convicted for their roles in the planning of the operation. Oscar Luis Benitez, known as Ramon or Malay, was located in Brazil after years as a fugitive. He was extradited and convicted. His sentence reached 34 years. And then there was Lorenzo Gonzalez Martinez, the man who had descended from the red Ford Escort on the evening of September 21st, 2004, and stood at my window with a gun in his hand, the man who was identified as one of the fusileros, one of the shooters in the interception operation, had managed to evade justice for years. He was eventually located in Brazil, where he was living undercover. He was arrested in 2017. The extradition process took until 2022. In December 2024, 20 years after my death, Lorenzo Gonzalez Martinez stood before a Paraguayan court and received his verdict. He was convicted of participation in the kidnapping and of complicity in the decision-making process that led to my death. His sentence was 23 years of imprisonment, plus 5 years of security measures, effectively 28 years in total. In April 2025, the appeals chamber confirmed the conviction. 20 years. It took 20 years to bring the man who stood outside my car with a gun to a point of legal accountability. That timeline is not a triumph. It is a testimony to the complexity and the difficulty of prosecuting crimes of this kind. Crimes that scatter perpetrators across borders, that involve organizations rather than individuals, that require the cooperation of multiple national jurisdictions and the accumulation of evidence across decades. Approximately 19 to 20 people were ultimately convicted in connection with my case. Sentences ranged from 5 years to 35 years. Each conviction represented months of investigative work, years of prosecutorial effort, and the relentless advocacy of my family. Particularly my mother, who occupied a seat in the Paraguayan Senate and used that platform to push for stronger laws, continued prosecutions, and the prevention of early release for those convicted. But there are figures who have not been brought to justice, and that incompleteness is a wound that has not closed. Juana Rome, Anuncio Martí, and Victor Colman, founders of the PPL and accused of being among the intellectual architects of the kidnapping for ransom system that took my life, fled Paraguay in 2003, claiming they had been subjected to torture at the hands of the state. After years in Brazil, their refugee status was revoked following a ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. They relocated to Finland, where they currently reside under international protection, holding documents issued through United Nations processes. Paraguay has active extradition requests pending. Helsinki has consistently declined to cooperate, citing concerns about the fairness of the Paraguayan justice system. The 3 men who are accused of founding the organization that killed me are living freely in a Nordic country, protected by international legal frameworks that were designed to shield the genuinely persecuted. Rodrigo Granda, the FARC's international liaison, the man identified as a key architect of the tactical collaboration that made my abduction possible, was covered by the peace agreement signed between the Colombian government and the FARC in 2016. The Paraguayan government issued a red notice through Interpol against Granda in 2008 for kidnapping, criminal association, and intentional homicide. The peace process that ended Colombia's civil war included amnesties and transitional justice provisions that effectively shielded Granda from extradition. The man whose organization trained the people who buried me alive benefits from a peace deal signed in a country where I was never a citizen, for a conflict I was never a party to. In July 2024, the house at Las Palmas 342, the House of Horror, as it came to be known, was formally transferred to the ownership of the Paraguayan state after years of legal proceedings. In 2025, it was auctioned by the State Asset Recovery Authority, Sinabico, for approximately 150 million guaraníes, roughly $20,000. The woman who purchased it announced that she planned to build a small chapel, an oratorio, in memory of Cecilia Cubas. In the years before its formal transfer, the site had already become an informal memorial, a place where citizens left candles, photographs, and handwritten prayers. The organization that killed me did not end with my death. The Ejército del Pueblo Paraguayo, the name formally adopted in 2008 by the remnants of the PPL's armed wing, continued its operations in the northern departments of Paraguay for years after my case was resolved. It committed new kidnappings. It killed police officers, soldiers, and civilians. It held hostages for years at a time. Former Vice President Oscar Dennis, kidnapped in 2020, remained in their custody as of 2026. In 2010, Paraguay enacted Law 4024, the law criminalizing terrorism, terrorist association, and terrorist financing. The law established prison terms of 10 to 30 years for terrorism and 5 to 15 years for terrorist association. It created a legal framework that allowed the state to treat the EPP as a terrorist organization rather than a collection of ordinary criminals. That law was written in the shadow of what happened to me. It exists because I died in the way that I died. This is the truth of my case. Not a clean resolution. Not a story with a closed door at the end. A story of partial justice, of enduring impunity for the highest level perpetrators, of a legal and political legacy that continues to unfold in courts, in legislatures, and in the jungle clearings of northern Paraguay, where the organization that murdered me still operates. The truth is complicated. The truth always is. But 19 people are serving prison sentences because of what they did to me. A law exists because of what they did to me. A country's security doctrine was permanently altered because of what they did to me. That is not nothing. That is not enough. But it is not nothing. My name was Cecilia Cubas. I was 31 years old. I was buried alive on a Christmas Eve in a country that was celebrating. I was found 2 months later beneath a concrete floor in an ordinary house on an ordinary street, in a neighborhood where people had lived their lives just meters above me without ever knowing I was there. I did not deserve what happened to me. No one does. I want you to carry something with you after this. That the woman at the center of this story was not a symbol, not a political abstraction, not a footnote in a guerrilla organization's operational history. She was a human being with a future. She was someone's daughter. She was 31 years old, and she had not yet lived the life she was still building. If knowing my story makes you more aware of the ideological violence that operates beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary societies, if it makes you more willing to recognize the human cost of treating people as assets rather than as people, then the telling of this story has served its purpose. My mother never stopped fighting. She carried my name into the halls of power and did not let anyone forget what was done to her daughter. That is the form that love takes when grief has no other outlet. My name was Cecilia, and now you know my story. This has been her final story.